And there are risks of an implosion, either the country or implosion of relationship with a neighbor. We take action to initiate dialogue because often the conflicts happen, wars happen because of lack of dialogue, lack of communication, and one side underestimate the other side, one side overestimate itself, no one listens to anyone, and then you have the war in Ukraine, and no one, we talk all the time about conflict prevention, and yet no one was able to read the boiling tensions in Palestine, in Gaza. What would we expect after years and years and years of trampling upon the rights of the Palestinians, of denying the Oslo Accord, denying the two-state solution? And then what would you expect if one side continue to trample on the rights of the Palestinians, building settlements, and then someone in Washington try to put a nail in the coffin of the Palestinians with the so-called Abrahamic Accords, thinking delusionally that just with the Abrahamic Accords with Arab states, it would quietly bury the Palestinians. So all of this is failure of the so-called conflict prevention. It's conflict prevention has become like almost a cliche because no one actually pay attention to it. I follow more closely the problem of Myanmar. Myanmar is the same. There was no attempt at reading properly the situation in Myanmar and to prevent the coup that actually happened. And the coup was anticipated. It would happen. And yet today, even with the ongoing war, the catastrophe in Myanmar, as the military are losing ground, they are losing this war, it is time to promote dialogue between the military and the NUG, the National Unity Government, the ethnic nationalities, dialogue promoted by a credible party, the only most credible party for Myanmar, I would say the Vatican, the Pope, that is completely neutral, although Catholics are a complete minority. The Cardinal and the Pope have enormous appeal, enormous credibility in Myanmar. So I personally, meeting with Vatican officials, with His Holiness the Pope, I urge the Vatican to do something about bringing the parties together in Myanmar. Now the role of artists, the role of cinema, the role of yes, absolutely important. Through cinema, you educate people and bring tragedies closer to our respective homes, whether the tragedy in Congo, the tragedy in Yemen, in Myanmar, in Gaza, because a lack of information means lack of empathy. If you do not know the situation, how can you be mobilized to take action? And obviously Ukraine generated enormous solidarity in Europe because there is next door to you, you all woke up and saw Ukrainian people, Ukraine being invaded by Russia. So it's very important that through cinema, through theater, culture, music, we educate, sensitize people, and that's the only way. And increasingly in this 21st century, civil society, public opinion play an ever more important role in preventing conflicts, in encouraging initiatives to end conflict. I think this is very quickly my first comments at this stage. I'm sorry I didn't provide any roadmap for how to solve conflict, but this was a bit of rambling outburst on my part, frustrated with what is happening in the world.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think in a very innovative way, you definitely got the ball rolling for our discussion, and I think it serves as an excellent outline and a framework for us to now begin. I must say, as you were speaking, I couldn't help but thinking of a recent conversation that I had with a former head of state from a small Eastern European country. I won't mention her name. I thought it was a great idea to host their conference on culture diplomacy. I'm the director of the ICD Academy for Culture Diplomacy. I explained my concept to her. She's one of our board members. At the end of my presentation, she said, "Mr. Domfried, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. However, we are currently at war. There will be no dialogue. There will be no diplomacy. There will be no culture diplomacy." And for her, diplomacy itself was a curse word. How dare I refer to this? And obviously many are of this opinion, especially when we look at Russia, Ukraine, especially, of course, the perspectives of small countries close by, one can understand. But you raise such an important point. So simple, yet I think so often so rare. But let's begin the discussion. What I'd like to do, since we have such a prominent panel, the Prime Minister of Kenya is in the building. He hasn't yet arrived. So I would suggest we begin with the panelists who are here. I'd like to ask also Mr. Correll, if you could maybe join us also on the panel. And maybe we could even just go from left to right, a few brief words of introduction to get the ball rolling. Those key issues, those questions that you think are relevant. It's a daunting task to try to answer this question or respond to this very, very important question. And I think that will serve as an excellent catalyst for then hopefully some spontaneous discussion. I've also prepared a few questions as well. To my left, very honored and grateful to have Joseph Yossi Beilin, former Minister of Justice of Israel. To my right, honored to have Mr. Ivan Simonovich, former Minister of Justice of Croatia. To his right, Hans Korel, former United Nations Under-Secretary General for Legal Affairs and Legal Counsel. And we're being joined virtually as well by Jan Eliasson, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden and former Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Thank you again for joining us, also virtually. If he would agree, I'd very much like to begin to my left, someone I had the pleasure of getting to know for the first time yesterday and already have benefited greatly from his wisdom and insights. Please share with us your opening remarks.
Thank you very much. We are in a very tough business. We are trying to find solutions. We are trying to find general solutions to conflicts. We are studying it, we are teaching it, and we don't know. And my personal conclusion is that you need leaders. It is usually not bottom up, it is top down. Although it is very, very important to have the support of the public, but it is top down. When the leaders decide to make peace, usually, if not always, we have the special case of Cyprus after the UN resolution. But usually the people support it because most of the people want the same thing: education, safety, whatever for their own people. It's not new. But you had to have leaders who really understand that this is the best thing for their national interest. And this is not always the case, as you just told us a minute ago. And you need leaders who are ready to risk their lives. As simple as that. I mean, I remember a discussion with President Clinton after the Camp David summit of July 2000 between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And Clinton was very furious with Yasser Arafat because he suggested something, and Yasser Arafat, during the talks in Camp David, was negative about his plan. And they had a tete-a-tete small meeting, and Arafat said to Clinton, "Mr. President, had I accepted your plan, you would have come to my funeral." So I asked the president, "So, Mr. President, what did you say to him?" And he looked at me and said, "Yossi, what could I say to something like that?" And he saw that I said nothing. So he said, what would you say to him? And I said to him, with all due respect, I would say, so what? How can you even think about comparing your own life or your rest of your life to the big thing of risking your people? It is very primitive, I know. It is very simplistic, maybe. But I'm thinking about King Abdullah I in Jordan, about President Hosni Zaim in Syria, about President Sadat in Egypt, about Yitzhak Rabin in Israel. All of them tried to make peace. All of them were murdered by people who, like in all these cases, could define them as people who actually committed treason because they gave up on something. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, and when it comes to you, and I can remember a lot of events during the Oslo process which I initiated. The threats on the kids, which is always the worst thing. The threats on the kids. Once they called my kid and said, your father was killed in a car accident. You know, for example, sending bullets in an envelope. Nice. I'm not speaking about demonstrations and that all the neighbors hated me. But the sheer risk for your life, it is something that you have to overcome. If you don't do that, forget about making peace. And I think that people sometimes are bypassing this problem as if it is only a matter of how can we compromise, what should I pay, what should you pay, and what is the process. No, it is first that you are ready to risk your life in most of these cases. Another thing is to believe that the conflicts are soluble, because those who are against the solutions, because of whatever reason, are trying to convince the public opinion that our conflict is very unique. Very unique. I cannot even tell you the details because you will never understand. It is our culture and our history, and it is so unique. And you know what? This is insoluble. Maybe yours is soluble. You can find a solution about territory, about religion, about whatever. But we cannot solve it. Nonsense. Sheer nonsense. But if you don't believe that conflicts are soluble, then you cannot even compromise. What can you do? The idiotic things of managing the conflict, as if you are in a situation where you can be in charge of the flames. Who can be in charge of flames? If something happens and is the cause or the reason for violence somewhere in a village which develops into a civil war or another war, a war with the neighbors, between tribes, between nations, can you really control the flames? Who are you? You are just the president, just the prime minister, just a minister. You cannot stop it. So it is an illusion that you can do such things. And I don't have to say here, I'm sure that people are aware of it more than myself. We politicians, diplomats, are firefighters. We are firefighters. Firefighters don't go to a place which is not in fire and say, maybe we can pour some water on this house. You say, are you crazy? I mean, what are you doing? Everything is okay. So this is one of the problems, that we come only when the problem is already there and fire is there and it is difficult to save the people. Now, what are we doing? Usually, we can defer. We can say, okay, not now. The Palestinian state, not now, in 5 years. And you know, when it was in the midst of the talks in Oslo, I approached our Prime Minister Rabin. I was then the Deputy Foreign Minister. And I said, Yitzhak, we have a partner. We can finish the job. Give me the mandate to go for the permanent agreement, not for the interim one. Because 5 years will allow all the lunatics on both sides to have such a fire that it would not be possible to get to the permanent agreement. And he had his reasons, why not, and I will not get into it. But I believe that one of the reasons in our conflict for not getting to the permanent agreement on May the 4th, 1999, which was the deadline to get to the permanent agreement, was that the 5 years were too long. And when people believe that the permanent solution is the end of their dreams, and when people are ready to sacrifice their lives, anything may happen. Anything may happen. And that is why you shouldn't give the spoilers an interim period which they might abuse. What could be done? It's difficult to create leaders who are ready to sacrifice their lives. There is no such lesson in school. It is possible to have a big comparative work, and it was done, to compare all the conflicts in the world and to suggest solutions for all these conflicts. One of them was East Timor. I mean, East Timor for years, after what happened in Portugal, was insoluble until it was soluble. And I think that this is one of the options, to have a serious work on all the conflicts. I remember once I visited Boutros Ghali, the late Boutros Ghali, was a friend of mine, in his office, and he said, Yossi, I have now on my table 72 international conflicts. I think that now the number is bigger. And since each conflict is different than the other, but still there are so many similarities, that you can suggest options for solutions for all of them, and try to analyze it and try to systematically work on these solutions, even if there is no fire. And I'll finish my introduction with a small story. I was on my way for an official visit to India, and on the eve of the visit, there was a meeting with my staff and the department in the foreign ministry, which dealt with the issues of India, and I prepared myself to speak on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is my forte. So they said to me, well, this is not the issue for them. The issue may be Kashmir, and you should speak about the Shimla Agreement of '72. Okay? And what do you expect me to say about the Shimla Agreement? They said, you can say that Israel supports the Shimla Agreement. Now, if you remember the Shimla Agreement, which is still in power, it keeps the status quo. Exchange of prisoners, but it keeps the status quo. So that as long as there is no change, it is India which is in charge of Kashmir. It is divided, but the bottom line is that it is in the advantage of India. As if we decide today to keep the status quo between Israel and the Palestinians, so the Israel is winning because it is still occupying the territories, if people believe that it is a win. Not me. But, so I said, okay, I read during the flight the Shimla Agreement very carefully, and we landed in Mumbai, and it was a sea of photographers and journalists on the field. I didn't understand that they were waiting for me, so I went down, and I prepared myself for the answers, and they shouted and asked me, what is the policy of Israel vis-a-vis the Shimla Agreement of '72? And I said, Israel supports the Shimla Agreement of '72. And they all left. I still wanted to speak about the Palestinians and the Israelis and the prospects for peace, but it was only the Shimla Agreement. And the Shimla Agreement was never a solution. But for India, it was a solution, a kind of a solution. The Kashmir war goes on. It is not in the headlines anymore. Innocent people are killed. Military people are killed. And it will go on. And my successors will go to India, and they will be told by the ministry that they should support the Shimla Agreement because the whole world should support the Shimla Agreement. And the journalist will come, interview them, and close the cameras. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So very, very inspirational and insightful reflections. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to announce that we've been joined by the former Prime Minister of Kenya. So I'd like to give him the floor right now for his opening keynote address. I'd remind everyone, try to keep the addresses brief so we have time for everyone. We have until 3 o'clock. The topic, as we know, conflict resolution. Formulas for and by the European Union, NATO, and the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a very warm and heartfelt welcome for the Honorable former Prime Minister of Kenya, Mr. Raila Odinga.
Thank you very much for the introduction here. I arrived when my colleague was already talking, but generally we're talking about conflict resolutions. And as he has pointed out, the world is full of conflicts. The issue is how do you resolve these conflicts? The different ways, and also it depends on the nature or the type of the conflict and the causes of the conflict. My view is that if you don't address the causes of the conflict, then you cannot find a solution to the conflict themselves. We have had in our own country, Kenya, a conflict that almost ended up almost splitting the country. We lost several lives during that conflict. it was a post-election conflict. What happened was that election results were manipulated, and the parties were not satisfied with what was being announced as the result of the elections. And as a result of this, people took to the streets, and then the others reacted by using security forces to deny people the rights to demonstrate, and police used live bullets, which ended up in loss of many lives. A stage where the international community came on stage, and led by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan. The mediation exercise was initiated. I happened to have been on one side of the conflict. My colleague with whom we were competing was on the other side of the conflict. And it took, what you can say, give and take for both sides for us to have an agreement. It lasted a long time. We put up our team, our side, the other side put their team, and they negotiated, and after about 2 months, a final accord was arrived at. We had actually to argue before the presence of other presidents from other countries a final solution. My view is that it's a give and take. A winner-take-all cannot end up in a satisfactory solution. But having said that, I have been involved myself in this not once. We have had elections whose results have been disputed until even the last one was disputed, and we still have not yet reached a accord as we are talking today. But I can give other examples on the continent of Africa. As you know, we have got several flashpoints on the continent. Ethiopia is one, Sudan is another one, DR Congo is another one. Then there are, of course, also other countries in West Africa where military coups have taken place, like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, Gabon, and there have been also coup attempts in Guinea and Guinea-Bissau on the continent. The causes of these, of course, vary, but most of them are governance issues. As you know, that we now had these multi-party systems on the continent. They came as a result of the end of the Cold War. You see, before the end of the Cold War, of course, Africa was really misgoverned. But when the Cold War ended, then multi-party system were introduced. But what has happened is that the people were forced to allow multipartyism, but they did not want to relinquish power. They wanted to continue to perpetuate themselves in power. So elections become rituals which are held periodically, but which don't end up reflecting the will of the people. And that is why what has actually ended up translating into the military coups coming back again. We now have a situation where military coups take place, and the population are jubilant, are actually receiving the men in the uniform with both hands. So something is seriously wrong there. There are conflicts which have got to do with resource sharing, like in the Congo, eastern part of Congo. There's been this conflict going on for a long time. It can be, some people could put it simply that, oh, it may be an ethnic issue. But no, it is an issue, it's a conflict that has to do with the resource share or the country, or the conflict over resource sharing. And there is a lot of international involvement or in the conflict, which is not apparent, but which is there. Congo, as you know, is one of the richest countries in terms of natural resources on earth. Most of the rare minerals, whether they're lithium, whether they are uranium, whether you're talking about diamonds, you're talking about gold, you're talking about this, they're all there in the Congo. And that's why there's a lot of international interest in the Congo, so that problem cannot really be resolved simply by the Congolese themselves. There have been regional involvement and even the UN involvement in the Congo to try to find a solution to the problem. Ethiopian problem is also historical. It cannot be said to be ethnic. It has to do with governance issues and also issues of region or equitable share of resources within the country itself. It has taken quite a long time. There has been involvement of the African Union in trying to find a solution. Sudan, now you see, Sudan, they've always has been ruled by the military, and there have been attempts by civilians to gain power. Unfortunately, the military have always tried to reinvent themselves and subvert the cause of the will of the people of the Sudan. So we have now a situation where two sections of the military are fighting for power in the Sudan. It actually requires a lot of international efforts. Unfortunately, the international powers themselves are also divided. One is supporting one side, one is also supporting the other side. That actually complicates the situation in the Sudan. Basically, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that the conflicts that we have on the continent have got their causes which are local, but also with aspects of international involvement in these conflicts. When there's like that, it becomes very difficult to resolve. But secondly, it takes two to tango. Both sides must be prepared to give and take in a process of negotiations. A winner takes all will never solve a problem like this. And my view is that regional institutions like the EU, like the AU, the ASEAN, and so on, have a role to play in dealing with the issues which may be national, but have got international implications. That will be my presentation. Thank you.
Former Minister of Justice from Croatia. We're very happy that you could join us here today to travel all the way to Germany, and we very much look forward to your insights. Again, reminder, 5 minutes if possible. Keep it as short as we can so we have room for all the voices, also our participant joining us virtually. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome for the former Minister of Justice of Croatia, Mr. Ivan Simonovic.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, when addressing issue of conflicts, let us face the reality. We are having increasing number of conflicts. They last longer, and they are becoming more deadly, including for civilian populations. It means that we are not doing a good job in conflict prevention as well as in resolving conflicts. Now, I would focus on UN aspects of dealing with conflicts, and if there is one thing I could single out as change of paradigm, it's investment in prevention. It's present in Secretary General's recent document dealing with that new agenda for peace. It's contained in high-level advisory boards' opinions on how to deal with multilateralism and prevention. And finally, current draft of the Pact of the Future does have a strong reference on shifting our attention to prevention. They also include important emphasis on peace-building commission as a body that can contribute to such a trend. And since I was chairing as ambassador of Croatia in current capacity to PBC as chairman in 2023 and current vice chair, I would like to share with you my views how PBC can contribute to structural and operational prevention of conflict. Concerning structural prevention, Secretary General in his new agenda for peace launches, I think, highly important idea of conflict prevention strategies, emphasizing that they should be universal, meaning that every state and every region should have their conflict prevention and violence prevention strategies. As PBC chair, I was pushing very strongly that not only those strategies should be developed, they should also be reviewed. And Peace Building Commission should be a body that would be a forum for review of those strategies. Why PBC? Because PBC is a body consisting of representatives of Security Council, of Economic and Social Council, of General Assembly, of top troop contributing countries, and of top donors. So what would be the benefit of those reviews? The benefit would be peer-to-peer learning. So we could hear some good ideas how to prevent conflicts, but they could also serve to mobilize necessary resources for implementation of strategies who know what should be done but lack means to do so. Whether those are resources from bilateral donors or international financial institutions, they are best investment in conflict prevention. Secondly, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga mentioned the importance of regional mechanisms. It is creation of sustainable peace network consisting of various regional actors together with PBC working on conflict prevention. So when Security Council advises when PBC advises Security Council or General Assembly, it would coordinate with various regional mechanisms. And the other way to do structural prevention is also an important way forward. that all actors should be mobilized. So actors on various levels, not only state authorities, not only international organizations, but civil society actors such as women and youth. And finally, and I want to stick to time limits in order to give enough space for other colleagues, I would like to mention operational prevention, and I think that it's great to have Jan Eliasson online, because he will remember our old discussion on light footprint missions. The idea is that when countries are having increasing risks of conflict occurrence, there should be dispatched light footprint missions. Not wait for situation to deteriorate to the point that you need to send robust military UN missions, but to have preventive missions consisting of political officers, human rights officers, as well as some people engaged in a rule of law. Would they be accepted by member states? Some would accept them, some not. However, acceptance would be much more often if they would have financial muscle. Financial muscles in sense of financial resources to address the root causes of instability and conflict. So, thank you very much, and I save my ammunition for the second round.
Thank you very much. Very thoughtful presentation, very specific suggestions, and I think definitely has very much assisted. I'm hoping our next speaker will also stay with the topic of the United Nations, given his tremendous experience at the United Nations, Mr. Hans Corell. He's the former United Nations Under-Secretary General for Legal Affairs and Legal Counsel. Please join me in a very, very warm welcome for the Honorable Mr. Hans Corell.
Thank you very much. I was very glad to be invited to this panel. And in particular, I was specifically glad to see Raila Odinga here, because one of my most positive experiences from conflict solution is when Kofi Annan called me. I had retired from the UN in January 2008, and he had retired in 2007. And the election for president in Kenya, it was not possible to figure out who was elected. And what I would like to focus on now are the methods and the personalities. Because Kofi Annan said, Hans, you have to come down and assist me, because Kenya has to legislate. We have to create a grand coalition government in the country. And to do that, we need to legislate. So I went down and listened to the negotiators. And we were first at Tsavo National Park, and then we went back to Nairobi. And I followed the meetings and the plenaries. And the plenaries were organized in such a manner that every morning when they met, somebody said a prayer. And one day, Kofi Annan said, tomorrow I will say the prayer. And when he did so, he quoted the third verse in the Kenyan national anthem. Natuyenge taifa letu, ndiyo wajibu wetu, Kenya istahili heshima, tuungane mikono. And this means, I think, that Kenya we're so glad that we have our own state now, and will now build our state together. And then Kofi Annan continued and said, Lord, may you make these negotiators realize that it's not now only a question of building Kenya, it's a question of bringing Kenya together. And this he did. And I think that this is one of the most important elements here. Kofi Annan had retired, and it was not the UN, it was the African Union that had appointed him chairman of the panel of eminent African personalities. And he engaged immediately in discussions with the highest level in Kenya, one of them being Raila Odinga. And I had such a positive experience of this. And I was then appointed chairman of the Legal Working Group on Governance, where I had 2 members from the Kikuyu and 2 members of the Kalenjin. And we were asked to prepare the legislation necessary to form a grand coalition government in the country. And we worked intensively for a few days. And then Kofi Annan presented this draft for Raila Odinga and the others top level in Kenya. Then the National Assembly adopted this legislation. and it came to regulate a coalition government in the country for 5 years. And by the way, one of the members in my legal working group was William Ruto, who is now the president of Kenya. But I would just say that the personalities here, if you're a lawyer, you need a lawyer to do the technical work, but that's not the main thing. The main thing is that you have the personalities at the top level who can communicate and come to a realization that we have to do our duty here. We have to find a solution. So I would say that the experience of Kenya back in 2008, that really is very, very positive for me. And also the fact that Kofi Annan was able to join hands with the negotiators in Kenya, and we had the solution. I would then like to go to another situation where the United Nations, or two other situations where the United Nations were involved, and that was Kosovo and East Timor. And we heard about East Timor a while ago here. I was all of a sudden made aware that now the United Nations would administer 2 provinces. We would have to legislate for these provinces. And I immediately rushed up to Kofi Annan and said, well, realize that how do we do this? This is a very fine method of solving the problem. But there is one problem here. What about the existing legislation? And I said to him, there's no way we can take away all this existing legislation. It has to be applied. And we should legislate, but we shouldn't call it law. We should call it regulations. And he agreed immediately. And 2 provinces, the first regulation he issued was existing law shall continue to be applied. Second paragraph. However, if in the application of this law you would violate human rights or the standards of this nature, then the court would have the right to set the law aside and find other solutions. So I think that this system was an extremely interesting system to see applied here in the 2 provinces. And lastly, I will go back to Europe. And before I came to the UN, I was involved in transforming the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe into what today is the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. And here people were involved at very high levels in all the national states. And it was a very positive atmosphere in these negotiations. And I was privileged to be chairing the legal committee who made the drafts of the legal rules that made it possible to transform this commission into what it is today, namely a legal personality. This, I think, is so interesting to see how this was possible to make. Now, I think I have spoken. Yes, let me see now here. So I'm not stealing too much time here. Yes, 6 minutes. So I think that I should be polite here and leave the floor open for others. But I just wanted to share these 3 very different situations with you so that you realize that there are many methods which you can use to solve conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing with us those 3 very powerful examples from your own career at the level of global governance. Very insightful. Our final speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sweden and former Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. So he's seen this on the national level with a lot of experience and at the global governance level. We very much look forward to your perspectives. Please join me in a warm welcome. He'll be joining us virtually, the Honorable Mr. Jan Eliasson.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me. I'm very glad to join you at this meeting. I must say, looking at the world today, that I believe we are living in a period of a diplomacy deficit. I think we unfortunately don't see compromise and talks and dialogue as the way to act and use the methods of prevention. My experience, having mediated in probably 6 different conflicts and wars, is that usually wars end up with several losers only. And therefore, I think this attempt by you at the World Forum to bring the idea of conflict resolution to the forefront is very commendable, and I thank you. I was president of the General Assembly once when we established a formula, which I'm reminded of both by Ivan's intervention and Hans' intervention. The formula that we devised together, actually Kofi Annan and I and a team, was the following. There is no peace without development, but there is no development without peace. And there is neither peace nor development without respect of human rights. In other words, the whole work of international organizations, UN in particular, but also nations, in my view, I would hope, is to make sure that we work on all these three fronts: peace, development, and human rights at the same time, not in a sort of sequential order. But we need to understand that if one of these pillars is weak, the whole structure is weak. Now, I look back at my many years at the UN, particularly as Deputy Secretary General, and have seen the I would say, immobility and passivity of the Security Council, or in many examples. Of course, Syria at the time I served, but also later we've seen in Ukraine, and of course now in the Israel-Palestine situation. You see it also in the Sudan case that Prime Minister Odinga mentioned, Yemen. And this is a period where we really need to look at, first of all, revitalizing the Security Council, and secondly, what other options we have. As to revitalization, I think we should simply come to the conclusion that using the veto should be seen as a failure. It should be regarded as a failure of negotiation. We have not simply done the job, and we haven't accepted the responsibility given in the UN Charter to the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. Then, of course, if this becomes a negotiation body, we would be living in a different world. But I would also say that we have more methods than we actually are employing. Ivan mentioned one of them, the light foot presence, to send out a mission quickly, observers and special envoys, to make sure that they could serve as catalysts for diffusing a conflict. That has been done in some cases, but it has not been done in several others. I'm also sure that we could move further if the Security Council is immobilized, as unfortunately we must agree to do now in view of the present situation in the world and the damage that it has done to the UN. We should look at what the General Assembly can do, and we should look at what the Secretary General can do. The General Assembly has shown very clearly as a tribune for world opinion. The votes on the Russian invasion of Ukraine were overwhelming, as you noticed, over 140 votes twice, both on the invasion and on the annexation. And then, of course, same thing on Israel-Palestine. You have a similar view, votes of the nation. And I think we could even recall the Korean case, where a Uniting for Peace formula made it possible to send troops out abroad, actually with the blessing of the General Assembly. And then, of course, the Secretary General. There is a article in the UN Charter that I constantly reminded Ban Ki-moon of, and others, both before and after him, Article 99, which gives the Secretary General the right to bring any issue to the attention of the Security Council. You could imagine that bringing in from the different members of the Security Council on the ministerial level people who are affected or affecting a conflict, to bring them around the table and have a discussion even in preventive purposes could be an important tool to be used. So I would just say that we need to be very innovative and bring out new methods, and really see that if we don't strengthen the international institutions right now, we strengthen this trend of going bilateral or going unilateral, and looking inward. And therefore, the work for establishing the international organizations as the areas, the tools for conflict resolution is also basically in our national interest. I would say that a good international solution is in fact in the national interest of most nations. But we are far away from this right now. But I think the work that you've done at the forum and that you at this panel are representing shows the importance of never giving up, and the importance, as several of you have underlined, of good and strong leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say it was brilliant of the organizers of the Cinema for Peace to organize this panel and to invite such a prestigious, experienced group of panelists. It was less brilliant for them to give us only 60 minutes. We should have had 60 minutes for each of you, because unfortunately what's missing now is the component of discussion. But it really was excellent that we were allowed to have the benefit of hearing your perspectives, benefiting from your experiences. I've been told also there's another panel taking place here in 1 minute. I also need to chair a panel down the hall in 1 minute. So unfortunately, we do need to bring this to conclusion. I hope, however, this will be the commencement of many discussions that will come during the coffee breaks, during the informal opportunities that we have, perhaps also at the gala dinner this evening. So I'd like to ask everyone to please join me in a very, very warm and heartfelt, sincere expression of our gratitude to each of the panelists joining us from afar as well as here in the room for an excellent and insightful session. Thank you very much.